My project was on electrotype, which is like electroplating except 5 to 7 times better. Both processes are due to the flow of electrons in electrolytic cells. As electrons are drawn out of the copper electrode, the positively charged copper ions in solution are attracted to the negative electrode. When they get to the negative electrode, they bond to it and form a thin layer of copper on the outer surface of the electrode. In electrotyping, we're doing a very similar process to this, just with a much heavier deposition. In electrotyping, we do something a little different. We make a mold of an object, then coat it in a conductive material. In this case, what we'll be coating it in is graphite paint. We then place this conductive mold that we have made into a copper sulfate, where copper metal ions deposit onto the surface of the mold, creating an exact copy. This process is very similar to casting, as it produces an identical copy of whatever is placed in the mold, instead of much lower temperature in comparison. To do this, we had to make 3 things. First, we'll need non-conductive molds to copy. In the plating process, we'll need paint to give the conductive surface for the mold, and we'll need the copper solution to provide the copper ions. We're going to run through how I made these, starting with the molds. So I started out, I made 2 silicone molds, as you can see here, me bouncing on the table. But I want to talk about these as little as possible. These turned out absolutely garbage, as you can see in this. What is that? Is the question I have. What is that? That didn't turn out well at all. So in the end, I ended up tossing all of the stuff I made in those molds. And I made a few molds out of wax. You may not be able to see it because it's pretty dark in this recording, but right there, I'll see if I can boost the gamma. But right there is 2 keys embedded in wax covered in sand, so I can remove them later. And those molds are the ones that I ended up using later to make the type. So, and that's all I can say for that. Don't use silicone molds. So this was my attempt at conductive paint, and I say attempt because all in all, this attempt turned out horrible. I used activated carbon. I tossed it in the blender since carbon is relatively conductive and it can be used and made into a paint relatively cheap without me having to grind up a bunch of copper. Mixed it with Elmer's glue and water so I could make a relatively thin mixture that would dry when it's applied to like plastics and the mold. And all in all, it didn't work at all. It just made a runny soup mixture that didn't really coagulate ever, and it was pretty much useless. So when I went back to make the conductive paint for my second attempt, I ended up just using seed black graphite, which you'll see in a second. I'll have a container of it. And I mixed that with just regular black acrylic, and it formed a much better paint in comparison. So yeah, so what I learned is you have to pretty much use conductive paint, not conductive ink. Conductive ink recipes aren't as waterproof as you would probably expect them to be, seeing as ink is relatively waterproof. But yeah, so we decided to change scenery for this portion of the video. So here we are at the back of my old high school using a trash bin to make copper solution. We're adding this white powder, which is citric acid powder. We can use any weak acid we want to form the solution. I wouldn't recommend you use a strong acid because you kind of have to stick your hands in this solution. Into that powder we add water to make it into an actual solution. As I said earlier, you can use any acid, but using a rather weak acid just makes it easier to work with and stick your hands in, as you can see me doing here. Wear gloves. You really shouldn't do this without gloves. I don't know why I am doing it without gloves. We then add hydrogen peroxide. This will react with the copper we put in solution and make it easier for this acid to dissolve the copper and make the solution. Then we add heat to the solution. Once heated, then we add in the copper sulfate. This portion of the video has been sped up, and I don't know what happened with my computer while I was editing this, but we just ended up having large portions of freezing happening. But as you can see over the course of this period, the solution will turn bluer and bluer, which means there's more and more copper ions in the solution. Once it's a relatively deep blue, we can use it for the rest of the Electro typing process. And that's all she wrote. I couldn't mess this one up more than once. Alright, now at this point of the video, we've created everything. We've made the wax mold. I've painted on the graphite paint. I've attached the copper wire. The mold is ready to go. Everything's ready, set. I just need to have the solution, which I've already made at this point. It's high in concentration of copper ions, as you'll see in a second. There we go. We have copper pipe ready to provide more copper ions as the reaction continues in the cell. Everything's ready to go. It's just about complete, and you'll see in a second what's going to be the sort of success I've had. So we created the copper plated out onto the mold. It created a very thin layer of copper for how much time we've waited. It should be a lot thicker than that. It should be about 1 millimeter thick. So that's kind of disappointing, and that's all I can really describe it as. This field, to get proper electrotypes, it takes years and years of work, and I haven't done that yet, so my electrotypes are thin and unremovable from the mold at this point. I need to work on my pretty much build quality for a few more months to try and get something that's really holdable and usable. I actually ripped off the bottom half of the key as I was pulling it out. So, well, with that kind of disappointment, it's tight, but it's not thick enough to really use. So, as a sort of consolation prize, I have this, it's about to get to it, this Mewtwo painted up that I'm going to plate. So it's something that you guys can actually touch and see the copper layer on it. So that's what that's how we're going to have to end the project. It's kind of a disappointment to a good bit of work. So peace out.